Chapter 1. Greek, homos de kai en tutoir dialampe te kalon, epidon fair tes eukolos paulas kai megalas atikias, me di analgesian, allergenadas on kai megalopsychos. Aristotle's Ethics, I. 11. 12. The Consolation of Philosophy of Boethius. Translated into English prose and verse. By H. R. James, M.A., C.H., Oxford. Quantum libet igitu sevient mali, sapienti tamen corona non desidet, non arescit. Melioribus animam conformaveres, nihil opus ist judici premium deferente, tu te ipse excellenturibus addidisti, studium ad pahora deflexoris, extra ne quisiris ultorum, tu te ipse in deteriora trucisti. London, Eliot Stock, 62, Paternoster Row. The book called The Consolation of Philosophies was throughout the Middle Ages, and down to the beginnings of the modern epoch in the 16th century, the scholar's familiar companion. Few books have exercised a wider influence in their time. It has been translated into every European tongue, and into English nearly a dozen times, from King Alfred's paraphrase to the translations of Lord Preston, Causton, Ridpath, and Duncan in the 18th century. The belief that what once pleased so widely must still have some charm is my excuse for attempting the present translation. The great work of Boethius, with its alternate prose and verse, skillfully fitted together like dialogue and chorus in a Greek play, is unique in literature, and has a pathetic interest from the time and circumstances of its composition. It ought not to be forgotten. Those who can go to the original will find their reward. There may be room also for a new translation in English after an interval of close on 100 years. Some of the editions contain a reproduction of a bust purporting to represent Boethius. Lord Preston's translation, for example, has such a portrait, which it refers to an original in marble at Rome. This I have been unable to trace, and suspect that it is apocryphal. The Hope collection at Oxford contains a completely different portrait in a print, which gives no authority. I have ventured to use as a frontispiece a reproduction from a plaster cast in the Ashmolean Museum, taken from an ivory diptych preserved in the Bibliotheca Quiriniana at Brescia, which represents Nereus Manlius Boethius, the father of the philosopher. Portraiture of this period is so rare that it seemed that, failing a likeness of the author himself, this authentic representation of his father might have interest, as giving the consular dress, an insignia of the time, and also as illustrating the decadence of contemporary art. The consul wears a richly embroidered cloak, his right hand holds a staff surmounted by the Roman eagle, his left the mappa circensis, or napkin used for starting the races in the circus, at his feet are palms, and bags of money prizes for the victors in the games. For permission to use this cast my thanks are due to the authorities of the Ashmolean Museum, as also to Mr. T. W. Jackson, curator of the Hope collection, who first called my attention to its existence. I have to thank my brother, Mr. L. James, of Radley College, for much valuable help and for correcting the proof sheets of the translation. The text used is that of paper, Leipzig, 1874. Proem. Annicus Manlius Severinus Boethius lived in the last quarter of the 5th century AD, and the first quarter of the 6th. He was growing to manhood when Theodoric, the famous Ostrogoth, crossed the Alps and made himself master of Italy. Boethius belonged to an ancient family, which boasted a connection with the legendary glories of the Republic, and was still among the foremost in wealth and dignity in the days of Rome's abasement. His parents dying early, he was brought up by Symmachus, whom the age agreed to regard as of almost saintly character, and afterwards became his son-in-law. His varied gifts, aided by an excellent education, won for him the reputation of the most accomplished man of his time. He was orator, poet, musician, philosopher. It is his peculiar distinction to have handed on to the Middle Ages the tradition of Greek philosophy by his Latin translations of the works of Aristotle. Called early to a public career, the highest honors of the state came to him unsought. He was sole consul in 510 AD, and was ultimately raised by Theodoric to the dignity of Magister Officiorum, or head of the whole civil administration. He was no less happy in his domestic life, in the virtues of his wife, Rusticiana, and the fair promise of his two sons, Symmachus and Boethius, happy also in the society of a refined circle of friends. Noble, wealthy, accomplished, universally esteemed for his virtues, high in the favor of the Gothic king, he appeared to all men a signal example of the union of merit and good fortune. His felicity seemed to culminate in the year 522 AD, when, by special and extraordinary favor, his two sons, young as they were for so exalted an honor, were created joint consuls and rode to the Senate house attended by a throng of senators and the acclamations of the multitude. Boethius himself, amid the general applause, delivered the public speech in the king's honor usual on such occasions. Within a year he was a solitary prisoner at Pavia, stripped of honors, wealth, and friends, with death hanging over him, and a terror worse than death, in the fear lest those dearest to him should be involved in the worst results of his downfall. It is in this situation that the opening of the Consolation of Philosophy brings Boethius before us. He represents himself as seated in his prison distraught with grief, indignant at the injustice of his misfortunes, and seeking relief for his melancholy in writing verses descriptive of his condition. Suddenly there appears to him the divine figure of philosophy, in the guise of a woman of superhuman dignity and beauty, who by a succession of discourses convinces him of the vanity of regret for the lost gifts of fortune, raises his mind once more to the contemplation of the true good, and makes clear to him the mystery of the world's moral government. Index of Verse Interludes. Book I. The Sorrows of Boethius. Song page I. Boethius Complaint 3-2. His Despondency 9-3. The Mists Dispelled 12-4. Nothing Can Subdue Virtue 16v. Boethius Prayer 27-6. All Things Have Their Needful Order 33-7. The Perturbations of Passion 38. Book 2. The Vanity of Fortune's Gifts. Ein Fortune's Malice 47-2. Man's Covetousness 51-3. All Passes 55-4. The Golden Mean 62v. The Former Age 76. Nero's Infamy 76-7. Glory May Not Last 82-8. Love is Lord of All 85. Book 3. True Happiness and False. I. The Thorns of Error 93-2. The Bent of Nature 99-3. The Insatiableness OK Avarice 1054. Disgrace of Honors Conferred by a Tyrant 109v. Self-Mastery 113-6. True Nobility 116-7. Pleasure Sting 118-8. Human Folly 121-9. Invocation 130x. The True Light 141-11. Reminiscence 150-12. Orpheus and Eurydice 158. Book 4. Good and Ill Fortune. I. The Soul's Flight 1662. The Bondage of Passion 177-3. Circe's Cup 182-4. The Unreasonableness of Hatred 194v. Wonder and Ignorance 197-6. The Universal Aim 212-7. The Hero's Path 219. Book V. Free Will and God's Foreknowledge. I. Chance 229-2. The True Sun 233-3. Truth's Paradoxes 241-4. A Psychological Fallacy 250v. The Upward Look 255. Book I. The Sorrows of Boethius. Summary. Boethius Complaint, Song I. A philosophy appears to Boethius, drives away the muses of poetry, and herself laments, Song 2, the disordered condition of his mind, ch. 2. Boethius is speechless with amazement. Philosophy wipes away the tears that have clouded his eyesight, ch. 3. Boethius recognizes his mistress Philosophy. To his wondering inquiries she explains her presence, and recalls to his mind the persecutions to which philosophy has oftentimes from of old been subjected by an ignorant world. Ch. 4. Philosophy bids Boethius declare his griefs. He relates the story of his unjust accusation and ruin. He concludes with a prayer, Song v. that the moral disorder in human affairs may be set right, ch. via philosophy admits the justice of Boethius' self-indication, but grieves rather for the unhappy change in his mind. She will first tranquilize his spirit by soothing remedies, ch. 6. Philosophy tests Boethius' mental state by certain questions, and discovers three chief causes of his soul's sickness. He has forgotten his own true nature, he knows not the end towards which the whole universe tends, he knows not the means by which the world is governed. Book I Song ein Boethius complaint. Who wrought my studious numbers smoothly once in happier days, now perforce in tears and sadness learn a mournful strain to raise. Lo, the Muses, grief dishevelled, guide my pen and voice my woe, down their cheeks unfeigned the tear drops to my sad complainings flow. These alone in dangers our faithful found, have dared attend on the footsteps of the exile to his lonely journey's end. These that were the pride and pleasure of my youth and high estate still remain the only solace of the old man's mournful fate. Old? Ah yes, swift, ere I knew it, by these sorrows on me pressed age hath come, lo, grief hath bid me wear the garb that fits her best. O'er my head untimely sprinkled these white hairs my woes proclaim, and the skin hangs loose and shrivelled on this sorrow-shrunken frame. Blessed is death that intervenes not in the sweet, sweet years of peace, but unto the broken-hearted, when they call him, brings release. Yet death passes by the wretched, shuts his ear and slumbers deep, will not heed the cry of anguish, will not close the eyes that weep. For, while yet inconstant fortune poured her gifts and all was bright, death's dark hour had all but whelmed me in the gloom of endless night. Now, because misfortune's shadow hath o'erclouded that false face, cruel life still halts and lingers, though I loathe his weary race. Friends, why did ye once so lightly vaunt me happy among men? Surely he who so hath fallen was not firmly founded then. While I was thus mutely pondering within myself, and recording my sorrowful complainings with my pen, it seemed to me that there appeared above my head a woman of a countenance exceeding venerable. Her eyes were bright as fire, and of a more than human keenness, her complexion was lively, her vigour showed no trace of enfeeblement, and yet her years were right full, and she plainly seemed not of our age and time. Her stature was difficult to judge. At one moment it exceeded not the common height, at another her forehead seemed to strike the sky, and whenever she raised her head higher, she began to pierce within the very heavens, and to baffle the eyes of them that looked upon her. Her garments were of an imperishable fabric, wrought with the finest threads and of the most delicate workmanship, and these, as her own lips afterwards assured me, she had herself woven with her own hands. The beauty of this vesture had been somewhat tarnished by age and neglect, and wore that dingy look which marble contracts from exposure. On the lowermost edge was inwoven the Greek letter, Greek P, on the topmost the letter, Greek, th, a, and between the two were to be seen steps, like a staircase, from the lower to the upper letter. This robe, moreover, had been torn by the hands of violent persons, who had each snatched away what he could clutch. Her right hand held a notebook, in her left she bore a staff. And when she saw the Muses of Poesy standing by my bedside, dictating the words of my lamentations, she was moved awhile to wrath, and her eyes flashed sternly. Who, said she, has allowed yon play-acting wantons to approach this sick man? These who, so far from giving medicine to heal his malady, even feed it with sweet poison. These it is who kill the rich crop of reason with the barren thorns of passion, who accustom men's minds to disease, instead of setting them free. Now, were it some common man whom your allurements were seducing, as is usually your way, I should be less indignant. On such a one I should not have spent my pains for naught. But this is one nurtured in the Eleatic and academic philosophies. Nay, get ye gone, ye sirens, whose sweetness lasteth not, leave him for my Muses to tend and heal. At these words of upbraiding, the whole band, in deepened sadness, with downcast eyes, and blushes that confessed their shame, dolefully left the chamber. But I, because my sight was dimmed with much weeping, and I could not tell who was this woman of authority, so commanding I was dumbfounded, and, with my gaze fastened on the earth, continued silently to await what she might do next. Then she drew near me and sat on the edge of my couch, and, looking into my face all heavy with grief and fixed in sadness on the ground, she bewailed in these words the disorder of my mind. Footnotes. A. Greek P. P stands for the political life, the life of action, Greek, th, for the theoretical life, the life of thought. B. The Stoic, Epicurean, and other philosophical sects, which Boethius regards as heterodox. See also below, Chapter 3, page 14. Song 2. His despondency. Alas! In what abyss his mind is plunged, how wildly tossed! Still towards the outer night she sinks, her true light lost, as oft as, lashed tumultuously by earth-born blasts, care's waves rise high. Yet once he ranged the open heavens, the sun's bright pathway tracked, watched how the cold moon waxed and waned, nor rested, till there lacked to his wide ken no star that steers amid the maze of circling spheres. The causes why the blusterous winds vex ocean's tranquil face, whose hand doth turn the stable globe, or why his even race from out the ruddy east the sun unto the western waves doth run. What is it tempers cunningly the placid hours of spring, so that it blossoms with the rose for earth's engarlanding, who loads the year's maturer prime with clustered grapes in autumn time? All this he knew, thus ever strove deep nature's law to guess. Now, reft of reason's light, he lies, and bonds his neck oppress, while by the heavy load constrained, his eyes to this dull earth are chained. 2. But the time, said she, calls rather for healing than for lamentation. Then, with her eyes bent full upon me, art thou that man, she cries, who, erstwhile fed with the milk, and reared upon the nourishment which is mine to give, had grown up to the full vigor of a manly spirit? And yet I had bestowed such armor on thee as would have proved an invincible defense, hadst thou not first cast it away. Dost thou know me? Why art thou silent? Is it shame or amazement that hath struck thee dumb? Would it were shame, but, as I see, a stupor hath seized upon thee. Then, when she saw me not only answering nothing, but mute, and utterly incapable of speech, she gently touched my breast with her hand, and said, There is no danger, these are the symptoms of lethargy, the usual sickness of deluded minds. For a while he has forgotten himself, he will easily recover his memory, if only he first recognizes me. And that he may do so, let me now wipe his eyes that are clouded with a mist of mortal things. Thereat, with a fold of her robe, she dried my eyes all swimming with tears. Song 3. The mists dispelled. Then the gloom of night was scattered, sight returned unto mine eyes, \1, when happily rainy chorus rolls the storm clouds through the skies, hidden is the sun, all heaven is obscured in starless night. But if, in wild onset sweeping, Boreas frees day's prisoned light, all suddenly the radiant God outstreams, and strikes our dazzled eyesight with his beams. 3. Even so the clouds of my melancholy were broken up. I saw the clear sky, and regained the power to recognize the face of my physician. Accordingly, when I had lifted my eyes and fixed my gaze upon her, I beheld my nurse, Philosophy, whose halls I had frequented from my youth up. Ah! Why, I cried, mistress of all excellence, hast thou come down from on high, and entered the solitude of this my exile? Is it that thou, too, even as I, mayst be persecuted with false accusations? Could I desert thee, child, said she, and not lighten the burden which thou hast taken upon thee through the hatred of my name, by sharing this trouble? Even forgetting that it were not lawful for philosophy to leave companionless the way of the innocent, should I, thinkest thou, fear to incur reproach, or shrink from it, as though some strange new thing had befallen? Thinkest thou that now, for the first time in an evil age, wisdom hath been assailed by peril? Did I not often in days of old, before my servant Plato lived, wage stern warfare with the rashness of folly? In his lifetime, too, Socrates, his master, won with my aid the victory of an unjust death. And when, one after the other, the Epicurean herd, the Stoic, and the rest, each of them, as far as in them lay, went about to seize the heritage he left, and were dragging me off protesting and resisting, as their booty, they tore in pieces the garment which I had woven with my own hands, and, clutching the torn pieces, went off, believing that the whole of me had passed into their possession. And some of them, because some traces of my vesture were seen upon them, were destroyed through the mistake of the lewd multitude, who falsely deemed them to be my disciples. It may be thou knowest not of the banishment of Anaxagoras, of the poisoned draught of Socrates, nor of Zeno's torturing, because these things happened in a distant country, yet mightest thou have learnt the fate of Arius, of Seneca, of Serenus, whose stories are neither old nor unknown to fame. These men were brought to destruction for no other reason than that, settled as they were in my principles, their lives were a manifest contrast to the ways of the wicked. So there is nothing thou shouldst wonder at, if on the seas of this life we are tossed by storm blasts, seeing that we have made it our chiefest aim to refuse compliance with evildoers. And though, maybe, the host of the wicked is many in number, yet is it contemptible, since it is under no leadership, but is hurried hither and thither at the blind driving of mad error. And if at times and seasons they set in array against us, and fall on in overwhelming strength, our leader draws off her forces into the citadel while they are busy plundering the useless baggage. But we from our vantage ground, safe from all this wild work, laugh to see them making prize of the most valueless of things, protected by a bulwark which aggressive folly may not aspire to reach. Song 4. Nothing can subdue virtue. Whoso calm, serene, sedate, sets his foot on haughty fate, firm and steadfast, come what will, keeps his mien unconquered still, him the rage of furious seas, tossing high wild menaces, nor the flames from smoky forges that Vesuvius disgorges, nor the bolt that from the sky smites the tower, can terrify. Why, then, shouldst thou feel affright at the tyrant's weakling might? Dread him not, nor fear no harm, and thou shalt his rage disarm. But who to hope or fear gives way, lost his bosom's rightful sway, he hath cast away his shield, like a coward fled the field, he hath forged all unaware fetters his own neck must bear. For, dost thou understand, she asks, do my words sink into thy mind? Or art thou dull as the ass to the sound of the lyre? Why dost thou weep? Why do tears stream from thy eyes? Speak out, hide it not in thy heart. If thou lookest for the physician's help, thou must needs disclose thy wound. Then I, gathering together what strength I could, began, is there still need of telling? Is not the cruelty of fortune against me plain enough? Doth not the very aspect of this place move thee? Is this the library, the room which thou hadst chosen as thy constant resort in my home, the place where we so often sat together and held discourse of all things in heaven and earth? Was my garb and mien like this when I explored with thee nature's hid secrets, and thou didst trace for me with thy wand the courses of the stars, moulding the, while my character and the whole conduct of my life after the pattern of the celestial order? Is this the recompense of my obedience? Yet thou hast enjoined by Plato's mouth a maxim, that states would be happy, either if philosophers ruled them, or if it should so befall that their rulers would turn philosophers. By his mouth likewise thou didst point out this imperative reason why philosophers should enter public life, to wit, lest, if the reins of government be left to unprincipled and profligate citizens, trouble and destruction should come upon the good. Following these precepts, I have tried to apply in the business of public administration the principles which I learnt from thee in leisured seclusion. Thou art my witness, and that divinity who hath implanted thee in the hearts of the wise, that I brought to my duties no aim but zeal for the public good. For this cause I have become involved in bitter and irreconcilable feuds, and, as happens inevitably, if a man holds fast to the independence of conscience, I have had to think nothing of giving offence to the powerful in the cause of justice. How often have I encountered and balked Carnegastus in his assaults on the fortunes of the weak? How often have I thwarted Triguilla, steward of the king's household, even when his villainous schemes were as good as accomplished? How often have I risked my position and influence to protect poor wretches from the false charges innumerable with which they were forever being harassed by the greed and license of the barbarians? No one has ever drawn me aside from justice to oppression. When ruin was overtaking the fortunes of the provincials through the combined pressure of private rapine and public taxation, I grieved no less than the sufferers. When at a season of grievous scarcity a forced sale, disastrous as it was unjustifiable, was proclaimed, and threatened to overwhelm Campania with starvation, I embarked on a struggle with the Praetorian prefect in the public interest. I fought the case at the king's judgment seat, and succeeded in preventing the enforcement of the sale. I rescued the consular Paulinus from the gaping jaws of the court bloodhounds, who in their covetous hopes had already made short work of his wealth. To save Albinus, who was of the same exalted rank, from the penalties of a prejudged charge, I exposed myself to the hatred of Cyprian, the informer. Thinkest thou I had laid up for myself store of enmities enough? Well, with the rest of my countrymen, at any rate, my safety should have been assured, since my love of justice had left me no hope of security at court. Yet who was it brought the charges by which I have been struck down? Why, one of my accusers is Basil, who, after being dismissed from the king's household, was driven by his debts to lodge an information against my name. There is Apilio, there is Gaudentius, men who for many and various offences the king's sentence had condemned to banishment, and when they declined to obey, and sought to save themselves by taking sanctuary, the king, as soon as he heard of it, decreed that, if they did not depart from the city of Ravenna within a prescribed time, they should be branded on the forehead and expelled. What would exceed the rigour of this severity? And yet on that same day these very men lodged an information against me, and the information was admitted. Just heaven! Had I deserved this by my way of life? Did it make them fit accusers that my condemnation was a foregone conclusion? Has fortune no shame if not at the accusation of the innocent, at least for the vileness of the accusers? Perhaps thou wonderest what is the sum of the charges laid against me? I wished, they say, to save the Senate. But how? I am accused of hindering an informer from producing evidence to prove the Senate guilty of treason. Tell me, then, what is thy counsel, O my mistress? Shall I deny the charge, lest I bring shame on thee? But I did wish it, and I shall never cease to wish it. Shall I admit it? Then the work of thwarting the informer will come to an end. Shall I call the wish for the preservation of that illustrious house a crime? Of a truth the Senate, by its decrees concerning me, has made it such. But blind folly, though it deceive itself with false names, cannot alter the true merits of things, and, mindful of the precept of Socrates, I do not think it right either to keep the truth concealed, or allow falsehood to pass. But this, however it may be, I leave to thy judgment and to the verdict of the discerning. Moreover, lest the course of events and the true facts should be hidden from posterity, I have myself committed to writing an account of the transaction. What need to speak of the forged letters by which an attempt is made to prove that I hoped for the freedom of Rome? Their falsity would have been manifest, if I had been allowed to use the confession of the informers themselves, evidence which has in all matters the most convincing force. Why, what hope of freedom is left to us? Would there were any! I should have answered with the epigram of Cainius when Caligula declared him to have been cognizant of a conspiracy against him. If I had known, said he, thou shouldst never have known. Grief hath not so blunted my perceptions in this matter that I should complain because impious wretches contrive their villainies against the virtuous, but at their achievement of their hopes I do exceedingly marvel. For evil purposes are, perchance, due to the imperfection of human nature, that it should be possible for scoundrels to carry out their worst schemes against the innocent, while God beholdeth, is verily monstrous. For this cause, not without reason, one of thy disciples asked, if God exists, whence comes evil? Yet whence comes good, if he exists not? However, it might well be that wretches who seek the blood of all honest men, and of the whole Senate should wish to destroy me also, whom they saw to be a bulwark of the Senate and all honest men. But did I deserve such a fate from the fathers also? Thou rememberest, methinks since thou didst ever stand by my side to direct what I should do or say thou rememberest, I say, how at Verona, when the king, eager for the general destruction, was bent on implicating the whole senatorial order in the charge of treason brought against Albinus, with what indifference to my own peril I maintained the innocence of its members, one and all. Thou knowest that what I say is the truth, and that I have never boasted of my good deeds in a spirit of self-praise. For whenever a man by proclaiming his good deeds receives the recompense of fame, he diminishes in a measure the secret reward of a good conscience. What issues have overtaken my innocency, thou sayest? Instead of reaping the rewards of true virtue, I undergo the penalties of a guilt falsely laid to my charge. Nay, more than this, never did an open confession of guilt cause such unanimous severity among the assessors, but that some consideration, either of the mere frailty of human nature, or of fortune's universal instability, availed to soften the verdict of some few. Had I been accused of a design to fire the temples, to slaughter the priests with impious sword, of plotting the massacre of all honest men, I should yet have been produced in court, and only punished on due confession or conviction. Now for my too great zeal towards the Senate I have been condemned to outlawry, and death, unheard and undefended, at a distance of near 500 miles away. C.O., my judges, well do ye deserve that no one should hereafter be convicted of a fault like mine. Yet even my very accusers saw how honourable was the charge they brought against me, and, in order to overlay it with some shadow of guilt, they falsely asserted that in the pursuit of my ambition I had stained my conscience with sacrilegious acts. And yet thy Spirit, indwelling in me, had driven from the chamber of my soul all lust of earthly success, and with thine eye ever upon me, there could be no place left for sacrilege. For thou didst daily repeat in my ear and instill into my mind the Pythagorean maxim, follow after God. It was not likely, then, that I should covet the assistance of the vilest spirits, when thou wert moulding me to such an excellence. Chapter 2. I should conform me to the likeness of God. Again, the innocency of the inner sanctuary of my home, the company of friends of the highest probity, a father-in-law revered at once for his pure character and his active beneficence, shield me from the very suspicion of sacrilege. Yet atrocious as it is, they even draw credence for this charge from thee. I am like to be thought implicated in wickedness on this very account, that I am imbued with thy teachings and stablished in thy ways. So it is not enough that my devotion to thee should profit me nothing, but thou also must be assailed by reason of the odium which I have incurred. Verily this is the very crown of my misfortunes, that men's opinions for the most part look not to real merit, but to the event, and only recognize foresight where fortune has crowned the issue with her approval. Whereby it comes to pass that reputation is the first of all things to abandon the unfortunate. I remember with chagrin how perverse is popular report, how various and discordant men's judgments. This only will I say, that the most crushing of misfortune's burdens is, that as soon as a charge is fastened upon the unhappy, they are believed to have deserved their sufferings. I, for my part, who have been banished from all life's blessings, stripped of my honours, stained in repute, and punished for well-doing. And now methinks I see the villainous dens of the wicked surging with joy and gladness, all the most recklessly unscrupulous threatening a new crop of lying informations, the good prostrate with terror at my danger, every ruffian incited by impunity to new daring and to success by the profits of audacity, the guiltless not only robbed of their peace of mind, but even of all means of defence. Wherefore I would fain cry out. Footnotes. See the distance from Rome to Pavia, the place of Boethius' imprisonment, is 455 Roman miles. Song v. Boethius' prayer. Builder of yon starry dome, thou that whirlest, throned eternal, heaven's swift globe, and, as they roam, gidst the stars by laws supernal, so in full sphered splendour dight Cynthia dims the lamps of night, but unto the orb fraternal closer drawn, Dee doth lose her light. Who at fall of eventide, Hesper his cold radiance showeth, Lucifer his beams doth hide, paling as the sun's light groweth, brief, while winter's frost holds sway, by thy will the space of day, swift, when summer's fervour gloweth, speed the hours of night away. Thou dost rule the changing year, when rude Boreas oppresses, fall the leaves, they reappear, wooed by Zephyr's soft caresses. Fields that Sirius burns deep grown by Arcturus' watch were sown, each the reign of law confesses, keeps the place that is his own. Sovereign ruler, lord of all, can it be that thou disdainest only man? 'Gainst him, poor thrall, wanton fortune plays her vainest. Guilt's deserved punishment falleth on the innocent, high uplifted, the profanest on the just their malice vent. Virtue cowers in dark retreats, crime's foul stain the righteous beareth, perjury and false deceits hurt not him the wrong who dareth, but we know the wicked trust in ill strength to work their lust, kings, whom nations or declareth mighty, grovel in the dust. Look, O look upon this earth, thou who on law's sure foundation framedst all. Have we no worth, we poor men, of all creation? So we toss on fortune's tide, Master, bid the waves subside, and earth's ways with consummation of thy heaven's order guide. Footnotes. D. The moon is regarded as farthest from the sun at the full, and, as she wanes, approaching gradually nearer. V. When I had poured out my griefs in this long and unbroken strain of lamentation, she, with calm countenance, and in no wise disturbed at my complainings, thus spake. When I saw thee sorrowful, in tears, I straightway knew thee wretched and an exile. But how far distant that exile I should not know, had not thine own speech revealed it. Yet how far indeed from thy country hast thou, not been banished, but rather hast strayed, or, if thou wilt have it banishment, hast banished thyself. For no one else could ever lawfully have had this power over thee. Now, if thou wilt call to mind from what country thou art sprung, it is not ruled, as once was the Athenian polity, by the sovereignty of the multitude, but one is its ruler, one its king, who takes delight in the number of his citizens, not in their banishment, to submit to whose governance, and to obey whose ordinances is perfect freedom. Art thou ignorant of that most ancient law of this thy country, whereby it is decreed that no one whatsoever, who hath chosen to fix there his dwelling, may be sent into exile? For truly there is no fear that one who is encompassed by its ramparts and defences should deserve to be exiled. But he who has ceased to wish to dwell therein, he likewise ceases to deserve to do so. And so it is not so much the aspect of this place which moves me, as thy aspect, not so much the library walls set off with glass and ivory which I miss, as the chamber of thy mind, wherein I once placed, not books, but that which gives books their value, the doctrines which my books contain. Now, what thou hast said of thy services to the commonweal is true, only too little compared with the greatness of thy deservings. The things laid to thy charge whereof thou hast spoken, whether such as redound to thy credit, or mere false accusations, are publicly known. As for the crimes and deceits of the informers, thou hast rightly deemed it fitting to pass them over lightly, because the popular voice hath better and more fully pronounced upon them. Thou hast bitterly complained of the injustice of the Senate. Thou hast grieved over my calumniation, and likewise hast lamented the damage to my good name. Finally, thine indignation blazed forth against fortune, thou hast complained of the unfairness with which thy merits have been recompensed. Last of all thy frantic muse framed a prayer that the peace which reigns in heaven might rule earth also. But since a throng of tumultuous passions hath assailed thy soul, since thou art distraught with anger, pain, and grief, strong remedies are not proper for thee in this thy present mood. And so for a time I will use milder methods, that the tumours which have grown hard through the influx of disturbing passion may be softened by gentle treatment, till they can bear the force of sharper remedies. Song 6. All things have their needful order. He who to th and unwilling furrows gives the generous grain, when the crab with baleful fervours scorches all the plain, he shall find his garner bare, acorns for his scanty fare. Go not forth to cull sweet violets from the purpled steep, while the furious blasts of winter through the valleys sweep, nor the grape o'er hasty bring to the press in days of spring. For to each thing God hath given its appointed time, no perplexing change permits he in his plan sublime. So who quits the order due shall a luckless issue rue. 6. First, then, wilt thou suffer me by a few questions to make some attempt to test the state of thy mind, that I may learn in what way to set about thy cure. Ask what thou wilt, said I, for I will answer whatever questions thou choosest to put. Then said she, This world of ours, thinkest thou it is governed haphazard and fortuitously, or believest thou that there is in it any rational guidance? Nay, said I, in no wise may I deem that such fixed motions can be determined by random hazard, but I know that God, the Creator, presideth over his work, nor will the day ever come that shall drive me from holding fast the truth of this. Belief, yes, said she, thou didst even but now affirm it in song, lamenting that men alone had no portion in the divine care. As to the rest, thou wert unshaken in the belief that they were ruled by reason. Yet I marvel exceedingly how, in spite of thy firm hold on this opinion, thou art fallen into sickness. But let us probe more deeply, something or other is missing, I think. Now, tell me, since thou doubtest not that God governs the world, dost thou perceive by what means he rules it? I scarcely understand what thou meanest, I said, much less can I answer thy question. Did I not say truly that something is missing, whereby, as through a breach in the ramparts, disease hath crept in to disturb thy mind? But, tell me, dost thou remember the universal end towards which the aim of all nature is directed? I once heard, said I, but sorrow hath dulled my recollection. And yet thou knowest whence all things have proceeded. Yes, that I know, said I, and have answered that it is from God. Yet how is it possible that thou knowest not what is the end of existence, when thou dost understand its source and origin? However, these disturbances of mind have force to shake a man's position, but cannot pluck him up and root him altogether out of himself. But answer this also, I pray thee, rememberest thou that thou art a man? How should I not, said I then, canst thou say what man is? Is this thy question, whether I know myself for a being endowed with reason and subject to death? Surely I do acknowledge myself such. Then she, dost know nothing else that thou art? Nothing now, said she, I know another cause of thy disease, one, too, of grave moment. Thou hast ceased to know thy own nature, /1, then, I have made full discovery both of the causes of thy sickness and the means of restoring thy health. It is because forgetfulness of thyself hath bewildered thy mind that thou hast bewailed thee as an exile, as one stripped of the blessings that were his. It is because thou knowest not the end of existence that thou deemest abominable, and wicked men to be happy and powerful, while, because thou hast forgotten by what means the earth is governed, thou deemest that fortune's changes ebb and flow without the restraint of a guiding hand. These are serious enough to cause not sickness only, but even death, but, thanks be to the author of our health, the light of nature hath not yet left thee utterly. In thy true judgment concerning the world's government, in that thou believest it subject, not to the random drift of chance, but to divine reason, we have the divine spark from which thy recovery may be hoped. Have, then, no fear, from these weak embers the vital heat shall once more be kindled within thee. But seeing that it is not yet time for strong remedies, and that the mind is manifestly so constituted that when it casts off true opinions it straightway puts on false, wherefrom arises a cloud of confusion that disturbs its true vision, I will now try and disperse these mists by mild and soothing application, that so the darkness of misleading passion may be scattered, and thou mayst come to discern the splendor of the true light. Song 7. The perturbations of passion. Stars shed no light through the black night, when the clouds hide, and the lashed wave, if the winds rave o'er ocean's tide. Though once serene as day's fair sheen, soon fouled and spoiled by the storm's spite, shows to the sight turbid and soiled. Off the fair rill, down the steep hill seaward that strays, some tumbled block of fallen rock hinders and stays. Then art thou fain clear and most plain truth to discern, in the right way firmly to stay, nor from it turn? Joy, hope and fear suffer not near, drive grief away, shackled and blind and lost is the mind where these have sway. Book 2. The Vanity of Fortune's Gifts. Summary. CHIF philosophy reproves Boethius for the foolishness of his complaints against fortune. Her very nature is chapter and chapter 4 are taken from Plato's Agorgias. C. Jowett, Volume 2, pp 348 to 366, and also pp 400, 401, Gorgias, 466 to 479, and 508, 509. No trivial game is here, the strife is waged for Turnus' own dear life. Kennington. See Virgil, Aeneid, 12. 764, 745, compare to Iliad, Xi. 159 to 162, Song 2. The bondage of passion. When high enthroned the monarch sits, resplendent in the pride of purple robes, while flashing steel guards him on every side, when baleful terrors on his brow with frowning menace lower, and passion shakes his labouring breast, how dreadful seems his power. But if the vesture of his state from such a one thou tear, thou'lt see what load of secret bonds this lord of earth doth wear. Lust's poison rankles, o'er his mind rage sweeps in tempest rude, sorrow his spirit vexes sore, and empty hopes delude. Then thou'lt confess, one hapless wretch, whom many lords oppress, does never what he would, but lives in thraldom's helplessness. 3. Thou sayest, then, in what foulness unrighteous deeds are sunk, with what splendour righteousness shines. Whereby it is manifest that goodness never lacks its reward, nor crime its punishment. For, verily, in all manner of transactions that for the sake of which the particular action is done may justly be accounted the reward of that action, even as the wreath for the sake of which the race is run is the reward offered for running. Now, we have shown happiness to be that very good for the sake of which all things are done. Absolute good, then, is offered as the common prize, as it were, of all human actions, /1. Truly, this is a reward from which it is impossible to separate the good man, for one who is without good cannot properly be called good at all, wherefore righteous dealing never misses its reward. Rage the wicked, then, never so violently, the crown shall not fall from the head of the wise, nor wither. Verily, other men's unrighteousness cannot pluck from righteous souls their proper glory. Were the reward in which the soul of the righteous delighteth received from without, then might it be taken away by him who gave it, or some other, but since it is conferred by his own righteousness, then only will he lose his prize when he has ceased to be righteous. Lastly, since every prize is desire because it is believed to be good, who can account him who possesses good to be without reward? And what a prize, the fairest and grandest of all! For remember the corollary which I chiefly insisted on a little while back, and reason thus, since absolute good is happiness, 'tis clear that all the good must be happy for the very reason that they are good. But it was agreed that those who are happy are gods, /1, then, the prize of the good is one which no time may impair, no man's power lessen, no man's unrighteousness tarnish, 'tis very godship. And this being so, the wise man cannot doubt that punishment is inseparable from the bad. For since good and bad, and likewise reward and punishment, are contraries, it necessarily follows that, corresponding to all that we see accrue as reward of the good, there is some penalty attached as punishment of evil. As, then, righteousness itself is the reward of the righteous, so wickedness itself is the punishment of the unrighteous. Now, no one who is visited with punishment doubts that he is visited with evil. Accordingly, if they were but willing to weigh their own case, could they think themselves free from punishment whom wickedness, worst of all evils, has not only touched, but deeply tainted? See, also, from the opposite standpoint, the standpoint of the good, what a penalty attends upon the wicked. Thou didst learn a little since that whatever is one, and that unity itself is good. Accordingly, by this way of reckoning, whatever falls away from goodness ceases to be, whence it comes to pass that the bad cease to be what they were, while only the outward aspect is still left to show they have been men. Wherefore, by their perversion to badness, they have lost their true human nature. Further, since righteousness alone can raise men above the level of humanity, it must needs be that unrighteousness degrades below man's level those whom it has cast out of man's estate. It results, then, that thou canst not consider him human whom thou sayest transformed by vice. The violent despoiler of other men's goods, inflamed with covetousness, surely resembles a wolf. a bold and restless spirit, ever wrangling in law courts, is like some yelping cur. The secret schemer, taking pleasure in fraud and stealth, is own brother to the fox. The passionate man, frenzied with rage, we might believe to be animated with the soul of a lion. The coward and runaway, afraid where no fear is, may be likened to the timid deer. He who is sunk in ignorance and stupidity lives like a dull ass. He who is light and inconstant, never holding long to one thing, is for all the world like a bird. He who wallows in foul and unclean lusts is sunk in the pleasures of a filthy hog. So it comes to pass that he who by forsaking righteousness ceases to be a man cannot pass into a godlike condition, but actually turns into a brute beast. Song 3. Circe's Cup. Nithric and discreet, and all his storm-tossed fleet, far o'er the ocean wave the winds of heaven drave to the mystic isle, where dwelleth in her guile that fair and faithless one, the daughter of the sun. There for the stranger crew with cunning spells she knew to mix an enchanted cup. For whoso drinks it up, must suffer hideous change to monstrous shapes and strange. One like a boar appears, this his huge form upris, mighty in bulk and limb, an Afric lion grim with claw and fang. Confessed a wolf, this, sore distressed when he would weep, doth howl, and, strangely tame, these prowl the Indian tiger's mates. And though in such sore straits, the pity of the god who bears the mystic rod had power the chieftain brave from her fell arts to save, his comrades, unrestrained, the fatal goblet drained. All now with low-bent head, like swine, on acorns fed, man's speech and form were reft, no human feature left, but steadfast still, the mind, unaltered, unresigned, the monstrous change bewailed. How little, then, availed the potencies of ill! These herbs, this baneful skill, may change each outward part, but cannot touch the heart. In its true home, deep set, man's spirit liveth yet. Those poisons are more fell, more potent to expel man from his high estate, which subtly penetrate, and leave the body whole, but deep infect the soul. 4. Then said I, this is very true. I see that the vicious, though they keep the outward form of man, are rightly said to be changed into beasts in respect of their spiritual nature, but, inasmuch as their cruel and polluted minds vent their rage in the destruction of the good, I would this license were not permitted to them. Nor is it, said she, as shall be shown in the fitting place. Yet if that license which thou believest to be permitted to them were taken away, the punishment of the wicked would be in great part remitted. For verily, incredible as it may seem to some, it needs must be that the bad are more unfortunate when they have accomplished their desires than if they are unable to get them fulfilled. If it is wretched to will evil, to have been able to accomplish evil is more wretched, for without the power the wretched will would fail of effect. Accordingly, those whom thou sayest to will, to be able to accomplish, and to accomplish crime, must needs be the victims of a threefold wretchedness, since each one of these states has its own measure of wretchedness. Yes, said I, yet I earnestly wish they might speedily be quit of this misfortune by losing the ability to accomplish. Crime they will lose it, said she, sooner than perchance thou wishest, or they themselves think likely, since, verily, within the narrow bounds of our brief life there is nothing so late in coming that anyone, least of all an immortal spirit, should deem it long to wait for. Their great expectations, the lofty fabric of their crimes, is oft overthrown by a sudden and unlooked-for ending, and this but sets a limit to their misery. For if wickedness makes men wretched, he is necessarily more wretched who is wicked for a longer time, and were it not that death, at all events, puts an end to the evil doings of the wicked, I should account them wretched to the last degree. Indeed, if we have formed true conclusions about the ill fortune of wickedness, that wretchedness is plainly infinite which is doomed to be eternal. Then said I, a wonderful inference, and difficult to grant, but I see that it agrees entirely with our previous conclusions. Thou art right, said she, but if anyone finds it hard to admit the conclusion, he ought in fairness either to prove some falsity in the premises, or to show that the combination of propositions does not adequately enforce the necessity of the conclusion, otherwise, if the premises be granted, nothing whatever can be said against the inference of the conclusion. And here is another statement which seems not less wonderful, but on the premises assumed is equally necessary. What is that? The wicked are happier in undergoing punishment than if no penalty of justice chasten them. And I am not now meaning what might occur to anyone that bad character is amended by retribution, and is brought into the right path by the terror of punishment, or that it serves as an example to warn others to avoid transgression, but I believe that in another way the wicked are more unfortunate when they go unpunished, even though no account be taken of amendment, and no regard be paid to example. Why, what other way is there beside these? Said I. Then said she, have we not agreed that the good are happy, and the evil wretched? Yes, said I, and now, if, said she, to one in affliction there be given along with his misery some good thing, is he not happier than one whose misery is misery pure and simple without admixture of any good? It would seem so. But if to one thus wretched, one destitute of all good, some further evil be added besides those which make him wretched, is he not to be judged far more unhappy than he whose ill fortune is alleviated by some share of good? It could scarcely be otherwise. Surely, then, the wicked, when they are punished, have a good thing added to them, to wit, the punishment which by the law of justice is good, and likewise, when they escape punishment, a new evil attaches to them in that very freedom from punishment which thou hast rightly acknowledged to be an evil in the case of the unrighteous. I cannot deny it. Then, the wicked are far more unhappy when indulged with an unjust freedom from punishment than when punished by a just retribution. Now, it is manifest that it is just for the wicked to be punished, and for them to escape unpunished is unjust. Why, who would venture to deny it? This, too, no one can possibly deny that all which is just is good, and, conversely, all which is unjust is bad. Then I answered, these inferences do indeed follow from what we lately concluded, but tell me, said I, dost thou take no account of the punishment of the soul after the death of the body? Nay, truly, said she, great are these penalties, some of them inflicted, I imagine, in the severity of retribution, others in the mercy of purification. But it is not my present purpose to speak of these. So far, my aim hath been to make thee recognize that the power of the bad which shocked thee so exceedingly is no power, to make thee see that those of whose freedom from punishment thou didst complain are never without the proper penalties of their unrighteousness, to teach thee that the license which thou praydst might soon come to an end is not long enduring, that it would be more unhappy if it lasted longer, most unhappy of all if it lasted forever, thereafter that the unrighteous are more wretched if unjustly let go without punishment than if punished by a just retribution, from which point of view it follows that the wicked are afflicted with more severe penalties just when they are supposed to escape punishment. Then said I, while I follow thy reasonings, I am deeply impressed with their truth, but if I turn to the common convictions of men, I find few who will even listen to such arguments, let alone admit them to be credible. True, said she, they cannot lift eyes accustomed to darkness to the light of clear truth, and are like those birds whose vision night illumines and day blinds, for while they regard, not the order of the universe, but their own dispositions of mind, they think the license to commit crime, and the escape from punishment, to be fortunate. But mark the ordinance of eternal law. Hast thou fashioned thy soul to the likeness of the better, thou hast no need of a judge to award the prize by thine own act. Hast thou raised thyself in the scale of excellence, hast thou perverted thy affections to baser things, look not for punishment from one without thee. Thine own act hath degraded thee, and thrust thee down. Even so, if alternately thou turn thy gaze upon the vile earth and upon the heavens, though all without thee stand still, by the mere laws of sight thou seemest now sunk in the mire, now soaring among the stars. But the common herd regards not these things. What, then? Shall we go over to those whom we have shown to be like brute beasts? Why, suppose, now, one who had quite lost his sight should likewise forget that he had ever possessed the faculty of vision, and should imagine that nothing was wanting in him to human perfection, should we deem those who saw as well as ever blind? Why, they will not even assent to this, either that they who do wrong are more wretched than those who suffer wrong, though the proof of this rests on grounds of reason no less strong. Let me hear these same reasons, said I. Wouldst thou deny that every wicked man deserves punishment? I would not, certainly. And that those who are wicked are unhappy is clear in manifold ways. Yes, I replied. Thou dost not doubt, then, that those who deserve punishment are wretched. Agreed, said I. So, then, if thou wert sitting in judgment, on whom wouldst thou decree the infliction of punishment, on him who had done the wrong, or on him who had suffered it? Without doubt, I would compensate the sufferer at the cost of the doer of the wrong. Then, the injurer would seem more wretched than the injured. Yes, it follows. And so for this and other reasons resting on the same ground, inasmuch as baseness of its own nature makes men wretched, it is plain that a wrong involves the misery of the doer, not of the sufferer. And yet, says she, the practice of the law courts is just the opposite. Advocates try to arouse the commiseration of the judges for those who have endured some grievous and cruel wrong, whereas pity is rather due to the criminal, who ought to be brought to the judgment seat by his accusers in a spirit not of anger, but of compassion and kindness, as a sick man to the physician, to have the ulcer of his fault cut away by punishment. Whereby the business of the advocate would either wholly come to a standstill, or, did men prefer to make it serviceable to mankind, would be restricted to the practice of accusation. The wicked themselves also, if through some chink or cranny they were permitted to behold the virtue they have forsaken, and were to see that by the pains of punishment they would rid themselves of the uncleanness of their vices, and win in exchange the recompense of righteousness, they would no longer think these sufferings pains, they would refuse the help of advocates, and would commit themselves wholly into the hands of their accusers and judges. Whence it comes to pass that for the wise no place is left for hatred, only the most foolish would hate the good, and to hate the bad is unreasonable. For if vicious propensity is, as it were, a disease of the soul like bodily sickness, even as we account the sick in body by no means deserving of hate, but rather of pity, so, and much more, should they be pitied whose minds are assailed by wickedness, which is more frightful than any sickness. Song 4. The unreasonableness of hatred. Why all this furious strife? Oh, why with rash and wilful hand provoke death's destined day? If death ye seek, lo, death is nigh, not of their masters will those coursers swift delay. The wild beasts vent on man their rage. Chapter 3. Yet 'gainst their brothers' lives men point the murderous steel, unjust and cruel wars they wage, and haste with flying darts the death to meet ordeal. No right nor reason can they show, 'tis but because their lands and laws are not the same. Wouldst thou give each his due, then know thy love the good must have, the bad thy pity claim. On this I said, I see how there is a happiness and misery founded on the actual deserts of the righteous and the wicked. /1 I wonder in myself whether there is not some good and evil in fortune as the vulgar understand it. Surely, no sensible man would rather be exiled, poor and disgraced, than dwell prosperously in his own country, powerful, wealthy, and high in honor. Indeed, the work of wisdom is more clear and manifest in its operation when the happiness of rulers is somehow passed on to the people around them, especially considering that the prison, the law, and the other pains of legal punishment are properly due only to mischievous citizens on whose account they were originally instituted. Accordingly, I do exceedingly marvel why all this is completely reversed, why the good are harassed with the penalties due to crime, and the bad carry off the rewards of virtue, and I long to hear from thee what reason may be found for so unjust a state of disorder. For assuredly I should wonder less if I could believe that all things are the confused result of chance. But now my belief in God's governance doth add amazement to amazement. For, seeing that he sometimes assigns fair fortune to the good and harsh fortune to the bad, and then again deals harshly with the good, and grants to the bad their heart's desire, how does this differ from chance, unless some reason is discovered for it all? Nay, it is not wonderful, said she, if all should be thought random and confused when the principle of order is not known. And though thou knowest not the causes on which this great system depends, yet forasmuch as a good ruler governs the world, doubt not for thy part that all is rightly done. Song via wonder and ignorance. Who knoweth not how near the pole Boethius' course doth go, must marvel by what heavenly law he moves his wain so slow, why late he plunges 'neath the main, and swiftly lights his beams again. When the full-orbed moon grows pale in the mid-course of night, and suddenly the stars shine forth that languished in her light, the astonished nation stand at gaze, and beat the air in wild amaze. None marvels why upon the shore the storm-lashed breakers beat, nor why the frost-bound glacier melt at summer's fervent heat, for here the cause seems plain and clear, only what's dark and hid we fear. Weak-minded folly magnifies all that is rare and strange, and the dull herds o'erwhelmed with awe at unexpected change. But wonder leaves enlightened minds, when ignorance no longer blinds. Footnotes. To frighten away the monster swallowing the moon. The superstition was once common. See Tyler's Primitive Culture, pp. 296-302. 6. True, said I, but, since it is thy office to unfold the hidden cause of things, and explain principles veiled in darkness, inform me, I pray thee, of thine own conclusions in this matter, since the marvel of it is what more than aught else disturbs my mind. A smile played one moment upon her lips as she replied, Thou carriest me to the greatest of all subjects of inquiry, a task for which the most exhaustive treatment barely suffices. Such is its nature that, as fast as one doubt is cut away, innumerable others spring up like hydras' heads, nor could we set any limit to their renewal did we not apply the mind's living fire to suppress them. For there come within its scope the questions of the essential simplicity of providence, of the order of fate, of unforeseen chance, of the divine knowledge and predestination, and of the freedom of the will. How heavy is the weight of all this thou canst judge for thyself, /1. Inasmuch as to know these things also is part of the treatment of thy malady, we will try to give them some consideration, despite the restrictions of the narrow limits of our time. Moreover, thou must for a time dispense with the pleasures of music and song, if so be that thou findest any delight therein, whilst I weave together the connected train of reasons in proper order. As thou wilt, said I. Then, as if making a new beginning, she thus discoursed, the coming into being of all things, the whole course of development in things that change, every sort of thing that moves in any wise, receives its due cause, order, and form from the steadfastness of the divine mind. This mind, calm in the citadel of its own essential simplicity, has decreed that the method of its rule shall be manifold. Viewed in the very purity of the divine intelligence, this method is called providence, but viewed in regard to those things which it moves and disposes, it is what the ancients called fate. That these two are different will easily be clear to anyone who passes in review their respective efficacies. Providence is the divine reason itself, seated in the supreme being, which disposes all things. Fate is the disposition inherent in all things which move, through which providence joins all things in their proper order. Providence embraces all things, however different, however infinite. Fate sets in motion separately individual things, and assigns to them severally their position, form, and time. So the unfolding of this temporal order unified into the foreview of the divine mind is providence, while the same unity broken up and unfolded in time is fate. And although these are different, yet is there a dependence between them, for the order of destiny issues from the essential simplicity of providence. For as the artificer, forming in his mind beforehand the idea of the thing to be made, carries out his design, and develops from moment to moment what he had before seen in a single instant as a whole, so God in his providence ordains all things as parts of a single unchanging whole, but carries out these very ordinances by fate in a time of manifold unity. So whether fate is accomplished by divine spirits as the ministers of providence, or by a soul, or by the service of all nature, whether by the celestial motion of the stars, by the efficacy of angels, or by the many-sided cunning of demons, whether by all or by some of these the destined series is woven, this, at least, is manifest, that providence is the fixed and simple form of destined events, fate their shifting series in order of time, as by the disposal of the divine simplicity they are to take place. Whereby it is that all things which are under fate are subjected also to providence, on which fate itself is dependent, whereas certain things which are set under providence are above the chain of fate, viz., those things which by their nearness to the primal divinity are steadfastly fixed, and lie outside the order of fate's movements. For as the innermost of several circles revolving round the same centre approaches the simplicity of the midmost point, and is, as it were, a pivot round which the exterior circles turn, while the outermost, whirled in ampler orbit, takes in a wider and wider sweep of space in proportion to its departure from the indivisible unity of the centre, while, further, whatever joins and allies itself to the centre is narrowed to a like simplicity, and no longer expands vaguely into space. Even so, whatsoever departs widely from primal mind is involved more deeply in the meshes of fate, and things are free from fate in proportion as they seek to come nearer to that central pivot, while if aught cleaves close to supreme mind in its absolute fixity, this, too, being free from movement, rises above fate's necessity. Therefore, as is reasoning to pure intelligence, as that which is generated to that which is, time to eternity, a circle to its centre, so is the shifting series of fate to the steadfastness and simplicity of Providence. It is this causal series which moves heaven and the stars, attempers the elements to mutual accord, and again in turn transforms them into new combinations, this which renews the series of all things that are born and die through like successions of germ and birth. It is its operation which binds the destinies of men by an indissoluble nexus of causality, and, since it issues in the beginning from unalterable providence, these destinies also must of necessity be immutable. Accordingly, the world is ruled for the best if this unity abiding in the divine mind puts forth an inflexible order of causes. And this order, by its intrinsic immutability, restricts things mutable which otherwise would ebb and flow at random. And so it happens that, although to you, who are not altogether capable of understanding this order, all things seem confused and disordered, nevertheless there is everywhere an appointed limit which guides all things to good. Verily, nothing can be done for the sake of evil even by the wicked themselves, for, as we abundantly proved, they seek good, but are drawn out of the way by perverse error. Far less can this order which sets out from the supreme centre of good turn aside anywhither from the way in which it began. Yet what confusion, thou wilt say, can be more unrighteous than that prosperity and adversity should indifferently befall the good, what they like and what they loathe come alternately to the bad? Yes, but have men in real life such soundness of mind that their judgments of righteousness and wickedness must necessarily correspond with facts? Why, on this very point their verdicts conflict, and those whom some deem worthy of reward, others deem worthy of punishment. Yet granted there were one who could rightly distinguish the good and bad, yet would he be able to look into the soul's inmost constitution, as it were, if we may borrow an expression used of the body. The marvel here is not unlike that which astonishes one who does not know why in health sweet things suit some constitutions, and bitter others, or why some sick men are best alleviated by mild remedies, others by severe. But the physician who distinguishes the precise conditions and characteristics of health and sickness does not marvel. Now, the health of the soul is nothing but righteousness, and vice is its sickness. God, the guide and physician of the mind, it is who preserves the good and banishes the bad. And he looks forth from the lofty watchtower of his providence, perceives what is suited to each, and assigns what he knows to be suitable. This, then, is what that extraordinary mystery of the order of destiny comes to, that something is done by one who knows, whereat the ignorant are astonished. But let us consider a few instances whereby appears what is the competency of human reason to fathom the divine unsearchableness. Here is one whom thou deemest the perfection of justice and scrupulous integrity, to all-knowing providence it seems far otherwise. We all know our Lucan's admonition that it was the winning cause that found favour with the gods, the beaten cause with Cato, /1. Shouldst thou see anything in this world happening differently from thy expectation, doubt not but events are rightly ordered, it is in thy judgment that there is perverse confusion. Grant, however, there be somewhere found one of so happy a character that God and man alike agree in their judgment about him, yet is he somewhat infirm in strength of mind. It may be, if he fall into adversity, he will cease to practice that innocency which has failed to secure his fortune. Therefore, God's wise dispensation spares him whom adversity might make worse, will not let him suffer who is ill-fitted for endurance. Another there is perfect in all virtue, so holy and nigh to God that Providence judges it unlawful that aught untoward should befall him, nay, doth not even permit him to be afflicted with bodily disease. As one more excellent than I, Enoth said, the very body of the holy saint is built of purest ether. Often it happens that the governance is given to the good that a restraint may be put upon superfluity of wickedness. To others Providence assigns some mixed lot suited to their spiritual nature, some it will plague lest they grow rank through long prosperity, others it will suffer to be vexed with sore afflictions to confirm their virtues by the exercise and practice of patience. Some fear overmuch what they have strength to bear, others despise overmuch that to which their strength is unequal. All these it brings to the test of their true self through misfortune. Some also have bought a name revered to future ages at the price of a glorious death, some by invincible constancy under their sufferings have afforded an example to others that virtue cannot be overcome by calamity, all which things, without doubt, come to pass rightly, and in due order, and to the benefit of those to whom they are seen to happen. As to the other side of the marvel, that the bad now meet with affliction, now get their heart's desire, this, too, springs from the same causes. As to the afflictions, of course no one marvels, because all hold the wicked to be ill-deserving. The truth is, their punishments both frighten others from crime, and amend those on whom they are inflicted, while their prosperity is a powerful sermon to the good, what judgments they ought to pass on good fortune of this kind, which often attends the wicked, so assiduously. There is another object which may, I believe, be attained in such cases. There is one, perhaps, whose nature is so reckless and violent that poverty would drive him more desperately into crime. His disorder Providence relieves by allowing him to amass money. Such a one, in the uneasiness of a conscience stained with guilt, while he contrasts his character with his fortune, perchance grows alarmed lest he should come to mourn the loss of that whose possession is so pleasant to him. He will, then, reform his ways, and through the fear of losing his fortune he forsakes his iniquity. Some, through a prosperity unworthily born, have been hurled headlong to ruin, to some the power of the sword has been committed, to the end that the good may be tried by discipline, and the bad punished. For while there can be no peace between the righteous and the wicked, neither can the wicked agree among themselves. How should they, when each is at variance with himself, because his vices rend his conscience, and ofttimes they do things which, when they are done, they judge ought not to have been done. Hence it is that this supreme providence brings to pass this notable marvel that the bad make the bad good. For some, when they see the injustice which they themselves suffer at the hands of evildoers, are inflamed with detestation of the offenders, and, in the endeavor to be unlike those whom they hate, return to the ways of virtue. It is the divine power alone to which things evil are also good, in that, by putting them to suitable use, it bringeth them in the end to some good issue. For order in some way or other embraceth all things, so that even that which has departed from the appointed laws of the order, nevertheless falleth within an order, though another order, that nothing in the realm of providence may be left to haphazard. But hard were the task, as a god, to recount all, nothing omitting. Nor, truly, is it lawful for man to compass in thought all the mechanism of the divine work, or set it forth in speech. Let us be content to have apprehended this only, that God, the Creator of universal nature, likewise disposeth all things, and guides them to good, and while he studies to preserve in likeness to himself all that he has created, he banishes all evil from the borders of his commonweal through the links of fatal necessity. Whereby it comes to pass that, if thou look to disposing providence, thou wilt nowhere find the evils which are believed so to abound on earth. But I see thou hast long been burdened with the weight of the subject, and fatigued with the prolixity of the argument, and now lookest for some refreshment of sweet poesy. Listen, then, and may the draught so restore thee that thou wilt bend thy mind more resolutely to what remains. Footnotes. N. Parmenides. Boethius seems to forget for the moment that philosophy is speaking. Song 6. The universal aim. Wouldst thou with unclouded mind view the laws by God designed, lift thy steadfast gaze on high to the starry canopy, see in rightful league of love all the constellations move. fiery soul, in full career, ne'er obstructs cold Phoebe's sphere, when the bear, at heaven's height, wheels his courser's rapid flight, though he sees the starry train sinking in the western main, he repines not, nor desires in the flood to quench his fires. In true sequence, as decreed, daily morn and eve succeed, Vesper brings the shades of night, Lucifer the morning light. Love, in alternation due, still the cycle doth renew, and discordant strife is driven from the starry realm of heaven. Thus, in wondrous amity, warring elements agree, hot and cold, and moist and dry, lay their ancient quarrel by, high the flickering flame ascends, downward earth forever tends. So the year in spring's mild hours loads the air with scent of flowers, summer paints the golden grain, then, when autumn comes again, bright with fruit the orchards glow, winter brings the rain and snow. Thus the season's fixed progression, tempered in a due succession, nourishes and brings to birth all that lives and breathes on earth. Then, soon run life's little day, all it brought it takes away. But one sits and guides the reins, he who made and all sustains, King and Lord and fountainhead, Judge most holy, law most dread, now impels and now keeps back, holds each waverer in the track. Else, were once the power withheld that the circling spheres compelled in their orbits to revolve, this world's order would dissolve, and th harmonious whole would all in one hideous ruin fall. But through this connected frame runs one universal aim, towards the good do all things tend, many paths, but one the end. For naught lasts, unless it turns backward in its course, and yearns to that source to flow again whence its being first was ta-yen. 7. Dost thou, then, see the consequence of all that we have said? Nay, what consequence? That absolutely every fortune is good fortune. And how can that be, said I. In attend, said she. Since every fortune, welcome and unwelcome alike, has for its object the reward or trial of the good, and the punishing or amending of the bad, every fortune must be good, since it is either just or useful. The reasoning is exceeding true, said I, the conclusion, so long as I reflect upon the providence and fate of which thou hast taught me, based on a strong foundation, \1, with thy leave, we will count it among those which just now thou didst set down as paradoxical. And why so, said she? Because ordinary speech is apt to assert, and that frequently, that some men's fortune is bad. Shall we, then, for a while approach more nearly to the language of the vulgar? That we may not seem to have departed too far from the usages of men. At thy good pleasure, said I, that which advantageth thou Chiloist good, dost thou not? Certainly, and that which either tries or amends advantageth. Granted is good, then. Of course. Well, this is their case who have attained virtue and wage war with adversity, or turn from vice and lay hold on the path of virtue. I cannot deny it. What of the good fortune which is given as reward of the good do the vulgar adjudge it bad? Anything but that, they deem it to be the best, as indeed it is. What, then, of that which remains, which, though it is harsh, puts the restraint of just punishment on the bad, does popular opinion deem it good? Nay, of all that can be imagined, it is accounted the most miserable. Observe, then, if, in following popular opinion, we have not ended in a conclusion quite paradoxical. How so, said I. Why, it results from our admissions that of all who have attained, or are advancing in, or are aiming at virtue, the fortune is in every case good, while for those who remain in their wickedness fortune is always utterly bad. It is true, said I, yet no one dare acknowledge it. Wherefore, said she, the wise man ought not to take it ill, if ever he is involved in one of fortune's conflicts, any more than it becomes a brave soldier to be offended when at any time the trumpet sounds for battle. The time of trial is the express opportunity for the one to win glory, for the other to perfect his wisdom. Hence, indeed, virtue gets its name, because, relying on its own efficacy, it yieldeth not to adversity. And ye who have taken your stand on virtue's steep ascent, it is not for you to be dissolved in delights, or enfeebled by pleasure, ye close in conflict most sharp with all fortune's vicissitudes, lest ye suffer foul fortune to overwhelm or fair fortune to corrupt you. Hold the mean with all your strength. Whatever falls short of this, or goes beyond, is fraught with scorn of happiness, and misses the reward of toil. It rests with you to make your fortune what you will. Verily, every harsh-seeming fortune, unless it either disciplines or amends, is punishment. Song 7. The Hero's Path. 10 years a tedious warfare raged, ere Ilium's smoking ruins paid for wedlock stained and faith betrayed, and great Atride's wrath assuaged. But when heaven's anger asked a life, and baffling winds his course withstood, the king put off his fatherhood, and slew his child with priestly knife. When by the cavern's glimmering light his comrades dear Odysseus saw in the huge Cyclops' hideous maw engulfed, he wept the piteous sight. But blinded soon, and wild with pain in bitter tears, and sore annoy for that foul feast's unholy joy grim Polyphemus paid again. His labours for Alcides win a name of glory far and wide, he tamed the centaur's haughty pride, and from the lion reft his skin. The foul birds with sure darts he slew, the golden fruit he stole in vain the dragon's watch, with triple chain from hell's depths Cerberus he drew. With their fierce lord's own flesh he fed the wild steeds, Hydra overcame with fire. 'Neath his own waves in shame maimed Achelous hid his head. Huge Cacus for his crimes was slain, on Libya's sands Antaeus hurled, the shoulders that upheld the world the great boar's dribbled spume did stain. Last toil of all his might sustained the ball of heaven, nor did he bend beneath this toil, his labour's end, the prize of heaven's high glory gained. Brave hearts, press on! Lo, heavenward lead these bright examples. From the fight turn not your backs in coward flight, earth's conflict won, the stars your meed. Book V. Free Will and God's Foreknowledge. Summary. Boethius asks if there is really any such thing as chance. Philosophy answers, in conformity with Aristotle's definition, phys. 2. 4. That chance is merely relative to human purpose, and that what seems fortuitous really depends on a more subtle form of causation, ch. 2. Has man, then, any freedom, if the reign of law is thus absolute? Freedom of choice, replies philosophy, is a necessary attribute of reason. Man has a measure of freedom, though a less perfect freedom than divine nature's, ch. 3. But how can man's freedom be reconciled with God's absolute foreknowledge? If God's foreknowledge be certain, it seems to exclude the possibility of man's free will. But if man has no freedom of choice, it follows that rewards and punishments are unjust as well as useless, that merit and demerit are mere names, that God is the cause of men's wickednesses, that prayer is meaningless, ch. 4. The explanation is that man's reasoning faculties are not adequate to the apprehension of the ways of God's foreknowledge. If we could know, as he knows, all that is most perplexing in this problem would be made plain. For knowledge depends not on the nature of the thing known, but on the faculty of the knower, ch.v. Now, where our senses conflict with our reason, we defer the judgment of the lower faculty to the judgment of the higher. Our present perplexity arises from our viewing God's foreknowledge from the standpoint of human reason. We must try and rise to the higher standpoint of God's immediate intuition, ch. 6. To understand this higher form of cognition, we must consider God's nature. God is eternal. Eternity is more than mere everlasting duration. Accordingly, his knowledge surveys past and future in the timelessness of an eternal present. His foreseeing is seeing. Yet this foreseeing does not in itself impose necessity, any more than our seeing things happen makes their happening necessary. We may, however, if we please, distinguish two necessities, one absolute, the other conditional on knowledge. In this conditional sense alone do the things which God foresees necessarily come to pass. But this kind of necessity affects not the nature of things. It leaves the reality of free will unimpaired, and the evils feared do not ensue. Our responsibility is great, since all that we do is done in the sight of all-seeing Providence. Book V. She ceased, and was about to pass on in her discourse to the exposition of other matters, when I break in and say, Excellent is thine exhortation, and such as well beseemeth thy high authority, but I am even now experiencing one of the many difficulties which, as thou saidst but now, beset the question of Providence. I want to know whether thou deemest that there is any such thing as chance at all, and, if so, what it is. Then she made answer, I am anxious to fulfill my promise completely, and open to thee a way of return to thy native land. As for these matters, though very useful to know, they are yet a little removed from the path of our design, and I fear lest digression should fatigue thee, and thou shouldst find thyself unequal to completing the direct journey to our goal. Have no fear for that, said I, it is rest to me to learn, where learning brings delight so exquisite, especially when thy argument has been built up on all sides with undoubted conviction, and no place is left for uncertainty in what follows. She made answer, I will accede to thy request, and forthwith she thus began, if chance be defined, as a result without any link of causal connection, I roundly affirm that there is no such thing as chance at all, and consider the word to be altogether without meaning, except as a symbol of the thing designated. What place can be left for random action, when God constraineth all things to order? For ex nihilo nihil is sound doctrine which none of the ancients gainsaid, although they used it of material substance, not of the efficient principle. This they laid down as a kind of basis for all their reasonings concerning nature. Now, if a thing arise without causes, it will appear to have arisen from nothing. But if this cannot be, neither is it possible for there to be chance in accordance with the definition just given. Well, said I, is there, then, nothing which can properly be called chance or accident, or is there something to which these names are appropriate, though its nature is dark to the vulgar? Our good Aristotle, says she, has defined it concisely in his Physics, and closely in accordance with the truth. How, pray, said I, thus, says she, whenever something is done for the sake of a particular end, and for certain reasons some other result than that designed ensues, this is called chance. For instance, if a man is digging the earth for tillage, and finds a mass of buried gold. Now, such a find is regarded as accidental, yet it is not ex nihilo, for it has its proper causes, the unforeseen and unexpected concurrence of which has brought the chance about. For had not the cultivator been digging, had not the man who hid the money buried it in that precise spot, the gold would not have been found. These, then, are the reasons why the find is a chance one, in that it results from causes which met together and concurred, not from any intention on the part of the discoverer. Since neither he who buried the gold nor he who worked in the field intended that the money should be found, but, as I said, it happened by coincidence that one dug where the other buried the treasure. We may, then, define chance as being an unexpected result flowing from a concurrence of causes where the several factors had some definite end. But the meeting and concurrence. Chapter 4. Of these causes arises from that inevitable chain of order which, flowing from the fountainhead of Providence, disposes all things in their due time and place. Song-eyed chance. In the rugged Persian highlands, where the masters of the bow skill to feign a flight, and, fleeing, hurl their darts, and pierce the foe, there the Tigris and Euphrates at one source, their waters blend, soon to draw apart, and plainward each its separate way to wend. When once more their waters mingle in a channel deep and wide, all the flotsam comes together that is borne upon the tide, ships, and trunks of trees, uprooted in the torrent's wild career, meet, as amid the swirling waters chance their random way may steer. Yet the shelving of the channel and the flowing waters' force guides each movement, and determines every floating fragment's course. Thus, where the drift of hazard seems most unrestrained to flow, chance herself is reined and bitted, and the curb of law doth know. Footnotes. This is not, of course, literally true, though the Tigris and Euphrates rise in the same mountain district. 2. I am following needfully, said I, and I agree that it is as thou sayest. But in this series of linked causes is there any freedom left to our will, or does the chain of fate bind also the very motions of our souls? There is freedom, said she, nor, indeed, can any creature be rational, unless he be endowed with free will. For that which of the natural use of reason has the faculty of discriminative judgment, and of itself distinguishes what is to be shunned or desired. Now, everyone seeks what he judges desirable, and avoids what he thinks should be shunned. Wherefore, beings endowed with reason possess also the faculty of free choice and refusal. But I suppose this faculty not equal alike in all. The higher divine essences possess a clear-sighted judgment, an uncorrupt will, and an effective power of accomplishing their wishes. Human souls must needs be comparatively free while they abide in the contemplation of the divine mind, less free when they pass into bodily form, and still less, again, when they are enwrapped in earthly members. But when they are given over to vices, and fall from the possession of their proper reason, then indeed their condition is utter slavery. For when they let their gaze fall from the light of highest truth to the lower world where darkness reigns, soon ignorance blinds their vision, they are disturbed by baneful affections, by yielding, and assenting to which they help to promote the slavery in which they are involved, and are in a manner led captive by reason of their very liberty. Yet he who seeth all things from eternity beholdeth these things with the eyes of his providence, and assigneth to each what is predestined for it by its merits. All things surveying, all things overhearing. Song 2. The True Sun. Homer with mellifluous tongue Phoebus glorious lighteth sung, hymning high his praise, yet his feeble rays ocean's hollows may not brighten, nor earth's central gloom enlighten. But the might of him, who skilled this great universe to build, is not thus confined, not earth's solid rind, nor night's blackest canopy, baffle his all-seeing eye. All that is, hath been, shall be, in one glance's compass, he limitless descries, and, save his, no eyes all the world survey no, none. Him, then, truly named the Sun 3. Then said I, but now I am once more perplexed by a problem yet more difficult. And what is that, said she, yet, in truth, I can guess what it is that troubles you. It seems, said I, too much of a paradox and a contradiction that God should know all things, and yet there should be free will. For if God foresees everything, and can in no wise be deceived, that which Providence foresees to be about to happen must necessarily come to pass. Wherefore, if from eternity he foreknows not only what men will do, but also their designs and purposes, there can be no freedom of the will, seeing that nothing can be done, nor can any sort of purpose be entertained, save such as a divine providence, incapable of being deceived, has perceived beforehand. For if the issues can be turned aside to some other end than that foreseen by Providence, there will not then be any sure foreknowledge of the future, but uncertain conjecture instead, and to think this of God I deem impiety. Moreover, I do not approve the reasoning by which some think to solve this puzzle. For they say that it is not because God has foreseen the coming of an event that therefore it is sure to come to pass, but, conversely, because something is about to come to pass, it cannot be hidden from divine providence, and accordingly the necessity passes to the opposite side, and it is not that what is foreseen must necessarily come to pass, but that what is about to come to pass must necessarily be foreseen. But this is just as if the matter in debate were, which is cause and which effect, whether foreknowledge of the future cause of the necessity, or the necessity of the future of the foreknowledge. But we need not be at the pains of demonstrating that, whatsoever be the order of the causal sequence, the occurrence of things foreseen is necessary, even though the foreknowledge of future events does not in itself impose upon them the necessity of their occurrence. For example, if a man be seated, the supposition of his being seated is necessarily true, and, conversely, if the supposition of his being seated is true, because he is really seated, he must necessarily be sitting, /1. In either case, there is some necessity involved in this latter case, the necessity of the fact, in the former, of the truth of the statement. But in both cases the sitter is not therefore seated because the opinion is true, but rather the opinion is true because antecedently he was sitting as a matter of fact. Thus, though the cause of the truth of the opinion comes from the other side, yet there is a necessity on both sides alike. We can obviously reason similarly in the case of Providence and the future. Even if future events are foreseen because they are about to happen, and do not come to pass because they are foreseen, still, all the same, there is a necessity, both that they should be foreseen by God, as about to come to pass, and that when they are foreseen they should happen, and this is sufficient for the destruction of free will, /1, it is preposterous to speak of the occurrence of events in time as the cause of eternal foreknowledge. And yet if we believe that God foresees future events because they are about to come to pass, what is it but to think that the occurrence of events is the cause of his supreme providence? Further, just as when I know that anything is, that thing necessarily is, so when I know that anything will be, it will necessarily be. It follows, then, that things foreknown come to pass inevitably. Lastly, to think of a thing as being in any way other than what it is not only not knowledge, but it is false opinion widely different from the truth of knowledge. Consequently, if anything is about to be, and yet its occurrence is not certain and necessary, how can anyone foreknow that it will occur? For just as knowledge itself is free from all admixture of falsity, so any conception drawn from knowledge cannot be other than as it is conceived. For this, indeed, is the cause why knowledge is free from falsehood, because of necessity each thing must correspond exactly with the knowledge which grasps its nature. In what way, then, are we to suppose that God foreknows these uncertainties as about to come to pass? For if he thinks of events which possibly may not happen at all as inevitably destined to come to pass, he is deceived, and this it is not only impious to believe, but even so much as to express in words. If, on the other hand, he sees them in the future as they are in such a sense as to know that they may equally come to pass, or not, what sort of foreknowledge is this which comprehends nothing certain nor fixed? What better is this than the absurd vaticination of Teresa's? Whate'er I say shall either come to pass or not. In that case, too, in what would divine providence surpass human opinion if it holds for uncertain things the occurrence of which is uncertain, even as men do? But if at that perfectly sure fountainhead of all things no shadow of uncertainty can possibly be found, then the occurrence of those things which he has surely foreknown as coming is certain. Wherefore there can be no freedom in human actions and designs, but the divine mind, which foresees all things without possibility of mistake, ties and binds them down to one only issue. But this admission once made, what an upset of human affairs manifestly ensues! Vainly are rewards and punishments proposed for the good and bad, since no free and voluntary motion of the will has deserved either one or the other, nay, the punishment of the wicked and the reward of the righteous, which is now esteemed the perfection of justice, will seem the most flagrant injustice, since men are determined either way not by their own proper volition, but by the necessity of what must surely be. And therefore neither virtue nor vice is anything, but rather good and ill desert are confounded together without distinction. Moreover, seeing that the whole course of events is deduced from providence, and nothing is left free to human design, it comes to pass that our vices also are referred to the author of all good, a thought than which none more abominable can possibly be conceived. Again, no ground is left for hope or prayer, since how can we hope for blessings, or pray for mercy, when every object of desire depends upon the links of an unalterable chain of causation? Gone, then, is the one means of intercourse between God and man, the communion of hope and prayer, if it be true that we ever earn the inestimable recompense of the divine favor at the price of a due humility, for this is the one way whereby men seem able to hold communion with God, and are joined to that unapproachable light by the very act of supplication, even before they obtain their petitions. Then, since these things can scarcely be believed to have any efficacy, if the necessity of future events be admitted, what means will there be whereby we may be brought near, and cleave to him who is the supreme head of all? Wherefore it needs must be that the human race, even as thou didst erstwhile declare in song, parted and dissevered from its source, should fall to ruin. Footnotes. P.i.e., the necessity of the truth of the statement from the fact. Song 3. Truth's Paradoxes. Why does a strange discordance break the ordered scheme's fair harmony? Hath God decreed 'twixt truth and truth there may such lasting warfare be, that truths, each severally plain, we strive to reconcile in vain? Or is the discord not in truth, since truth is self-consistent ever? But, close in fleshly wrappings held, the blinded mind of man can never discern, so faint her taper shines at the subtle chain that all combines? Ah! Then why burns man's restless mind truth's hidden portals to unclose? Knows he already what he seeks? Why toil to seek it, if he knows? Yet, haply if he knoweth not, why blindly seek he knows not what? Who for a good he knows not sighs? Who can an unknown end pursue? How find? How e'en when haply found hail that strange form he never knew? Or is it that man's inmost soul once knew each part and knew the whole? Now, though by fleshly vapours dimmed, not all forgot her visions past, for, while the several parts are lost, to the one whole she cleaveth fast, whence he who yearns the truth to find is neither sound of sight nor blind. For neither does he know in full, nor is he reft of knowledge quite, but, holding still to what is left, he gropes in the uncertain light, and by the part that still survives to win back all he bravely strives. Footnotes. Q. Compare Plato, Meno, 80, R. Jowett, Volume 2, pp. 39, 40. 4. Then said she, this debate about Providence is an old one, and is vigorously discussed by Cicero in his Divination. Thou also hast long and earnestly pondered the problem, yet no one has had diligence and perseverance enough to find a solution. And the reason of this obscurity is that the movement of human reasoning cannot cope with the simplicity of the divine foreknowledge, for if a conception of its nature could in any wise be framed, no shadow of uncertainty would remain. With a view of making this at last clear and plain, I will begin by considering the arguments by which thou art swayed. First, I inquire into the reasons why thou art dissatisfied with the solution proposed, which is to the effect that, seeing the fact of foreknowledge is not thought the cause of the necessity of future events, foreknowledge is not to be deemed any hindrance to the freedom of the will. Now, surely the sole ground on which thou arguest the necessity of the future is that things which are foreknown cannot fail to come to pass. But if, as thou wert ready to acknowledge just now, the fact of foreknowledge imposes no necessity on things future, what reason is there for supposing the results of voluntary action constrained to a fixed issue? Suppose, for the sake of argument, and to see what follows, we assume that there is no foreknowledge. Are willed actions, then, tied down to any necessity in this case? Certainly not. Let us assume foreknowledge again, but without its involving any actual necessity. The freedom of the will, I imagine, will remain in complete integrity. But thou wilt say that, even although the foreknowledge is not the necessity of the future event's occurrence, yet it is a sign that it will necessarily happen. Granted, but in this case it is plain that, even if there had been no foreknowledge, the issues would have been inevitably certain. For a sign only indicates something which does not bring to pass that of which it is the sign. We require to show beforehand that all things, without exception, happen of necessity in order that a preconception may be a sign of this necessity. Otherwise, if there is no such universal necessity, neither can any preconception be a sign of a necessity which exists not. Manifestly, too, a proof established on firm grounds of reason must be drawn not from signs and loose general arguments, but from suitable and necessary causes. But how can it be that things foreseen should ever fail to come to pass? Why, this is to suppose us to believe that the events which Providence foresees to be coming were not about to happen, instead of our supposing that, although they should come to pass, yet there was no necessity involved in their own nature compelling their occurrence. Take an illustration that will help to convey my meaning. There are many things which we see taking place before our eyes, the movements of charioteers, for instance, in guiding and turning their cars, and so on. Now, is any one of these movements compelled by any necessity? No, certainly not. There would be no efficacy in skill if all motions took place perforce. Then, things which in taking place are free from any necessity as to their being in the present must also, before they take place, be about to happen without necessity. Wherefore there are things which will come to pass, the occurrence of which is perfectly free from necessity. At all events, I imagine that no one will deny that things now taking place were about to come to pass before they were actually happening. Such things, however much foreknown, are in their occurrence free. For even as knowledge of things present imports no necessity into things that are taking place, so foreknowledge of the future imports none into things that are about to come. But this, thou wilt say, is the very point in dispute whether any foreknowing is possible of things whose occurrence is not necessary. For here there seems to thee a contradiction, and, if they are foreseen, their necessity follows, whereas if there is no necessity, they can by no means be foreknown, and thou thinkest that nothing can be grasped as known unless it is certain. But if things whose occurrence is uncertain are foreknown as certain, this is the very mist of opinion, not the truth of knowledge. For to think of things otherwise than as they are, thou believest to be incompatible with the soundness of knowledge. Now, the cause of the mistake is this, that men think that all knowledge is cognized purely by the nature and efficacy of the thing known. Whereas the case is the very reverse, all that is known is grasped not conformably to its own efficacy, but rather conformably to the faculty of the knower. An example will make this clear. The roundness of a body is recognized in one way by sight, in another by touch. Sight looks upon it from a distance as a whole by a simultaneous reflection of rays, touch grasps the roundness piecemeal, by contact and attachment to the surface, and by actual movement round the periphery itself. Man himself, likewise, is viewed in one way by sense, in another by imagination, in another way, again, by thought, in another by pure intelligence. Sense judges figure clothed in material substance, imagination figure alone without matter. Thought transcends this again, and by its contemplation of universals considers the type itself which is contained in the individual. The eye of intelligence is yet more exalted, for overpassing the sphere of the universal, it will behold absolute form itself by the pure force of the mind's vision. Wherein the main point to be considered is this: the higher faculty of comprehension embraces the lower, while the lower cannot rise to the higher. For sense has no efficacy beyond matter, nor can imagination behold universal ideas, nor thought embrace pure form, but intelligence, looking down, as it were, from its higher standpoint in its intuition of form, discriminates also the several elements which underlie it, but it comprehends them in the same way as it comprehends that form itself, which could be cognized by no other than itself. For it cognizes the universal of thought, the figure of imagination, and the matter of sense, without employing thought, imagination, or sense, but surveying all things, so to speak, under the aspect of pure form by a single flash of intuition. Thought also, in considering the universal, embraces images and sense impressions without resorting to imagination or sense. For it is thought which has thus defined the universal from its conceptual point of view. Man is a two-legged animal endowed with reason. This is indeed a universal notion, yet no one is ignorant that the thing is imaginable and presentable to sense, because thought considers it not by imagination or sense, but by means of rational conception. Imagination, too, though its faculty of viewing and forming representations is founded upon the senses, nevertheless surveys sense impressions without calling in sense, not in the way of sense perception, but of imagination. Seest thou, then, how all things in cognizing use rather their own faculty than the faculty of the things which they cognize? Nor is this strange, for since every judgment is the act of the judge, it is necessary that each should accomplish its task by its own, not by another's power. Song 4. A psychological fallacy. From the porch's murky depths comes a doctrine sage, that doth liken living mind to a written page, since all knowledge comes through sense, graven by experience. As, say they, the pen its marks curiously doth trace on the smooth unsullied white of the paper's face, so do outer things impress images on consciousness. But if verily the mind thus all passive lies, if no living power within its own force supplies, if it but reflect again, like a glass, things false and vain, whence the wondrous faculty that perceives and knows, that in one fair ordered scheme doth the world dispose, grasps each whole that sense presents, or breaks into elements, so divides and recombines, and in changeful wise now to low descends, and now to the height doth rise, last in inward swift review strictly sifts the false and true. Of these ample potencies fitter cause, I ween, were mind's self and marks impressed by the outer scene. Yet the body through the sense stirs the soul's intelligence. When light flashes on the eye, or sound strikes the ear, mind aroused to due response makes the message clear, and the dumb external signs with the hidden forms combines. Footnotes. A criticism of the doctrine of the mind as a blank sheet of paper on which experience writes, as held by the Stoics in anticipation of Locke. C. Zeller, Stoics, Epicureans, and Skeptics, Reichel's translation, page 76. Vere now, although in the case of bodies endowed with sentiency the qualities of external objects affect the sense organs, and the activity of mind is preceded by a bodily affection which calls forth the mind's action upon itself, and stimulates the forms till that moment lying inactive within, yet, I say, if in these bodies endowed with sentiency the mind is not inscribed by mere passive affection, but of its own efficacy discriminates the impressions furnished to the body, how much more do intelligences free from all bodily affections employ in their discrimination their own mental activities instead of conforming to external objects? So on these principles various modes of cognition belong to distinct and different substances. For to creatures void of motive power, shellfish and other such creatures which cling to rocks and grow there, belong sense alone, void of all other modes of gaining knowledge, to beasts endowed with movement, in whom some capacity of seeking and shunning seems to have arisen, imagination also. Thought pertains only to the human race, as intelligence to divinity alone. Hence it follows that that form of knowledge exceeds the rest which of its own nature cognizes not only its proper object, but the objects of the other forms of knowledge also. But what if sense and imagination were to gainsay thought, and declare that universal which thought deems itself to behold to be nothing? For the object of sense and imagination cannot be universal, so that either the judgment of reason is true and there is no sense object, or, since they know full well that many objects are presented to sense and imagination, the conception of reason, which looks on that which is perceived by sense and particular as if it were a something universal, is empty of content. Suppose, further, that reason maintains in reply that it does indeed contemplate the object of both sense and imagination under the form of universality, while sense and imagination cannot aspire to the knowledge of the universal, since their cognizance cannot go beyond bodily figures, and that in the cognition of reality we ought rather to trust the stronger and more perfect faculty of judgment. In a dispute of this sort, should not we, in whom is planted the faculty of reasoning as well as of imagining and perceiving, espouse the cause of reason? In like manner is it that human reason thinks that divine intelligence cannot see the future except after the fashion in which its own knowledge is obtained. For thy contention is, if events do not appear to involve certain and necessary issues, they cannot be foreseen as certainly about to come to pass. There is, then, no foreknowledge of such events, or, if we can ever bring ourselves to believe that there can be nothing which does not happen of necessity. If, however, we could have some part in the judgment of the divine mind, even as we participate in reason, we should think it perfectly just that human reason should submit itself to the divine mind, no less than we judged that imagination and sense ought to yield to reason. Wherefore let us soar, if we can, to the heights of that supreme intelligence, for their reason will see what in itself it cannot look upon, and that is in what way things whose occurrence is not certain may yet be seen in a sure and definite foreknowledge, and that this foreknowledge is not conjecture, but rather knowledge in its supreme simplicity, free of all limits and restrictions. Song v. The Upward Look. In what divers shapes and fashions do the creatures great and small over wide earth's teeming surface skim, or scud, or walk, or crawl? Some with elongated body sweep the ground, and, as they move, trail perforce with writhing belly in the dust a sinuous groove. Some, on light wing upward soaring, swiftly do the winds divide, and through heaven's ample spaces in free motion smoothly glide, these earth's solid surface pressing, with firm paces onward rove, ranging through the verdant meadows, crouching in the woodland grove. Great and wondrous is their variance. Yet in all the head low bent dulls the soul and blunts the senses, though their forms be different. Man alone, erect, aspiring, lifts his forehead to the skies, and in upright posture steadfast seems earth's baseness to despise. If with earth not all besotted, to this parable give ear, thou whose gaze is fixed on heaven, who thy face on high dost rear, lift thy soul, too, heavenward, haply lest it stain its heavenly worth, and thine eyes alone look upward, while thy mind cleaves to the earth. 6. Since, then, as we lately proved, everything that is known is cognized not in accordance with its own nature, but in accordance with the nature of the faculty that comprehends it, let us now contemplate, as far as lawful, the character of the divine essence, that we may be able to understand also the nature of its knowledge. God is eternal, in this judgment all rational beings agree. Let us, then, consider what eternity is. For this word carries with it a revelation alike of the divine nature and of the divine knowledge. Now, eternity is the possession of endless life whole and perfect at a single moment. What this is becomes more clear and manifest from a comparison with things temporal. For whatever lives in time is a present proceeding from the past to the future, and there is nothing set in time which can embrace the whole space of its life together. Tomorrow's state it grasps not yet, while it has already lost yesterday's, nay, even in the life of today ye live no longer than one brief transitory moment. Whatever, therefore, is subject to the condition of time, although, as Aristotle deemed of the world, it never have either beginning or end, and its life be stretched to the whole extent of time's infinity, it yet is not such as rightly to be thought eternal. For it does not include and embrace the whole space of infinite life at once, but has no present hold on things to come, not yet accomplished. Accordingly, that which includes and possesses the whole fullness of unending life at once, from which nothing future is absent, from which nothing past has escaped, this is rightly called eternal. This must of necessity be ever present to itself in full self-possession, and hold the infinity of movable time in an abiding present. Wherefore they deem not rightly who imagine that on Plato's principles the created world is made co-eternal with the Creator, because they are told that he believed the world to have had no beginning in time, and to be destined never to come to an end. For it is one thing for existence to be endlessly prolonged, which was what Plato ascribed to the world, another for the whole of an endless life to be embraced in the present, which is manifestly a property peculiar to the divine mind. Nor need God appear earlier in mere duration of time to created things, but only prior in the unique simplicity of his nature. For the infinite progression of things in time copies this immediate existence in the present of the changeless life, and when it cannot succeed in equaling it, declines from movelessness into motion, and falls away from the simplicity of a perpetual present to the infinite duration of the future and the past, and since it cannot possess the whole fullness of its life together, for the very reason that in a manner it never ceases to be, it seems, up to a certain point, to rival that which it cannot complete and express by attaching itself indifferently to any present moment of time, however swift and brief, and since this bears some resemblance to that ever-abiding present, it bestows on everything to which it is assigned the semblance of existence. But since it cannot abide, it hurries along the infinite path of time, and the result has been that it continues by ceaseless movement the life the completeness of which it could not embrace while it stood still, /1, if we are minded to. Chapter 5, Give Things Their Right Names. We shall follow Plato in saying that God indeed is eternal, but the world everlasting. Since, then, every mode of judgment comprehends its objects conformably to its own nature, and since God abides forever in an eternal present, his knowledge, also transcending all movement of time, dwells in the simplicity of its own changeless present, and, embracing the whole infinite sweep of the past and of the future, contemplates all that falls within its simple cognition as if it were now taking place. And therefore, if thou wilt carefully consider that immediate presentment whereby it discriminates all things, thou wilt more rightly deem it not foreknowledge as of something future, but knowledge of a moment that never passes. For this cause the name chosen to describe it is not provision, but providence, because, since utterly removed in nature from things mean and trivial, its outlook embraces all things as from some lofty height. Why, then, dost thou insist that the things which are surveyed by the divine eye are involved in necessity, whereas clearly men impose no necessity on things which they see? Does the act of vision add any necessity to the things which thou sayest before thy eyes? Assuredly not. And yet, if we may without unfitness compare God's present and man's, just as ye see certain things in this your temporary present, so does he see all things in his eternal present. Wherefore this divine anticipation changes not the natures and properties of things, and it beholds things present before it, just as they will hereafter come to pass in time. Nor does it confound things in its judgment, but in the one mental view distinguishes alike what will come necessarily and what without necessity. For even as ye, when at one and the same time ye see a man walking on the earth and the sun rising in the sky, distinguish between the two, though one glance embraces both, and judge the former voluntary, the latter necessary action, so also the divine vision in its universal range of view does in no wise confuse the characters of the things which are present to its regard, though future in respect of time. Whence it follows that when it perceives that something will come into existence, and yet is perfectly aware that this is unbound by any necessity, its apprehension is not opinion, but rather knowledge based on truth. And if to this thou sayest that what God sees to be about to come to pass cannot fail to come to pass, and that what cannot fail to come to pass happens of necessity, and wilt tie me down to this word necessity, I will acknowledge that thou affirmest a most solid truth, but one which scarcely anyone can approach to who has not made the divine his special study. For my answer would be that the same future event is necessary from the standpoint of divine knowledge, but when considered in its own nature it seems absolutely free and unfettered. One, then, there are two necessities, one simple, as that men are necessarily mortal, the other conditioned, as that, if you know that someone is walking, he must necessarily be walking. For that which is known cannot indeed be otherwise than as it is known to be, and yet this fact by no means carries with it that other simple necessity. For the former necessity is not imposed by the thing's own proper nature, but by the addition of a condition. No necessity compels one who is voluntarily walking to go forward, although it is necessary for him to go forward at the moment of walking. In the same way, then, if Providence sees anything as present, that must necessarily be, though it is bound by no necessity of nature. Now, God views as present those coming events which happen of free will. These, accordingly, from the standpoint of the divine vision are made necessary conditionally on the divine cognizance, viewed, however, in themselves, they desist not from the absolute freedom naturally theirs. Accordingly, without doubt, all things will come to pass which God foreknows as about to happen, but of these certain proceed of free will, and though these happen, yet by the fact of their existence they do not lose their proper nature, in virtue of which before they happened it was really possible that they might not have come to pass. What difference, then, does the denial of necessity make, since, through their being conditioned by divine knowledge, they come to pass as if they were in all respects under the compulsion of necessity? This difference, surely, which we saw in the case of the instances I formerly took, the sun's rising, and the man's walking, which at the moment of their occurrence could not but be taking place, and yet one of them before it took place was necessarily obliged to be, while the other was not so at all. So likewise the things which to God are present without doubt exist, but some of them come from the necessity of things, others from the power of the agent. Quite rightly, then, have we said that these things are necessary if viewed from the standpoint of the divine knowledge, but if they are considered in themselves, they are free from the bonds of necessity, even as everything which is accessible to sense, regarded from the standpoint of thought, is universal, but viewed in its own nature particular. But thou wilt say, if it is in my power to change my purpose, I shall make void Providence, since I shall perchance change something which comes within its foreknowledge. My answer is, thou canst indeed turn aside thy purpose, but since the truth of Providence is ever at hand to see that thou canst, and whether thou dost, and whither thou turnest thyself, thou canst not avoid the divine foreknowledge, even as thou canst not escape the sight of a present spectator, although of thy free will thou turn thyself to various actions. Wilt thou, then, say, shall the divine knowledge be changed at my discretion, so that, when I will this or that, Providence changes its knowledge correspondingly? Surely not. True, for the divine vision anticipates all that is coming, and transforms and reduces it to the form of its own present knowledge, and varies not, as thou deemest, in its foreknowledge, alternating to this or that, but in a single flash it forestalls and includes thy mutations without altering. And this ever-present comprehension and survey of all things God has received, not from the issue of future events, but from the simplicity of his own nature. Hereby also is resolved the objection which a little while ago gave the offence that our doings in the future were spoken of as if supplying the cause of God's knowledge. For this faculty of knowledge, embracing all things in its immediate cognizance, has itself fixed the bounds of all things, yet itself owes nothing to what comes after. And all this being so, the freedom of man's will stands unshaken, and laws are not unrighteous, since their rewards and punishments are held forth to wills unbound by any necessity. God, who foreknoweth all things, still looks down from above, and the ever-present eternity of his vision concurs with the future character of all our acts, and dispenseth to the good rewards, to the bad punishments. Our hopes and prayers also are not fixed on God in vain, and when they are rightly directed cannot fail of effect. Therefore, withstand vice, practice virtue, lift up your souls to right hopes, offer humble prayers to heaven. Great is the necessity of righteousness laid upon you if you will not hide it from yourselves, seeing that all your actions are done before the eyes of a judge who seeth all things. Footnotes. Plato expressly states the opposite in the Timaeus 28b, though possibly there the account of the beginning of the world in time is to be understood figuratively, not literally. See Jowett, Volume 3, pp. 448, 449, 3rd edit. Epilogue. Within a short time of writing the Consolation of Philosophy, Boethius died by a cruel death. As to the manner of his death there is some uncertainty. According to one account, he was cut down by the swords of the soldiers before the very judgment seat of Theodoric. According to another, a cord was first fastened round his forehead, and tightened till his eyes started. He was then killed with a club. Eliot Stock, Paternoster Row, London. References to quotations in the text. BKI, Chapter 4, page 17, L6, Iliad, I 363. Chapter 4, page 18, L7, Plato, Republic, v. 473, D. Jowett, Volume 3, pp. 170, 171, 3rd edit. Chapter 4, page 22, L6, Plato, Republic, I 347, C. Jowett, 3, page 25. Chapter V, page 30, L19, Iliad, 2, 204, 205. Book 2, Chapter 2, page 50, L21, Iliad. Xiv, 527, 528, Chapter 7, page 78, L25, Cicero, De Republica, 6. 20, in the Somnium Scipionis. Book 3, Chapter 4, page 106, L10, Catullus, Lii, 2. Chapter 6, page 114, L for Euripides, Andromache, 319, 320, Chapter 9, page 129, L3, Plato, Timaeus, 27, C. Jowett, Volume 3, page 448. Chapter 12, page 157, L14, quoted Plato, Sophists, 244, E. Jowett. Volume 4, page 374. Chapter 12, page 157, L22, Plato, Timaeus, 29, B. Jowett, Volume 3, page 449. Book 4, Chapter 6, page 206, L17, Lucan, Pharsalia, I 126, Chapter 6, page 210, L23, Iliad, 12. 176, BKV, Chapter I, p. 227, L16, Aristotle, Physics, 2. V5. Chapter 3, page 238, L20, Horace, Satires, 2. V59, Chapter 4, page 243, L3, Cicero, De Divination, 2. 7, 8.